Now let's talk about role models. Role models are some of the most important people you're going to have in your life because they show you what's possible, and they also oftentimes will show you a path to get there. So they give you an image of a goal, and then they also give you the path or the strategy to get there. And they can even show you the mistakes to avoid along the way. So role models are really important. And the challenging thing about role models is that oftentimes you can't get access to them, so access is a problem. And oftentimes, even if you can get access, it's very expensive. So when you're looking at skills and investing in skills, you want to be paying attention to what are the domains where there's people who are recording high level performance. Because if there's no way to get recordings of high quality performance, and it's very expensive or even impossible to access those people, then it's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to build those skills. So even if something is a great skill, if it's impossible to build it, or it's very risky because you don't know the right strategy, then that's probably not going to be a great investment for you to make because it's very high risk. Doesn't mean you can't do it, it just means it's risky. And in your portfolio of investments, and this is basically agreed upon strategy, is you have tranches where you have certain things that are very low risk, you have medium risk, and then there's a certain amount that's high risk. And out of your 100%, maybe you have 30% here, maybe you have 50% here, maybe you have 20% here. Okay, so depending on what your tolerance is, what your life is like, what your requirements are, you're going to have a different portfolio, a different risk assessment. But this is something that's very important when you're looking at your role models, is how hard or easy is it going to be for you to model them. And what I really recommend that you do is check out my courses in the expert series, especially the first two on All Experts Are Liars and How to Model Experts. Okay, because this is going to give you a much more accurate sense of what's going on with your role models. How are they doing what they're doing? How can you model them? And how can you also tease apart when they're telling the truth and when they're not? Because there's a lot of people out there in the media that are not necessarily who they seem to be. And it's very hard to measure that unless you know what's going on and how to spot those clues and those hints. Another really important thing, and we'll be talking about this more in the next video, is skills with many different names. And what this means is your role model may have a skill where in their domain there's no name or there's no strategies for developing that skill. Whereas in another domain, those strategies may exist. So what do I mean by that? Well, I was reading something in the Harvard Business Review just last month, and they talked about how one of the ways to build charismatic leadership skills was to do role playing in an acting class, acting improv class. Okay, most people assume who are in the business world, who are in contact or in one way or another in business with a charismatic leader, they have no idea that in the acting world, it's completely normal to learn through pretty well agreed upon strategies how to become more charismatic, how to perform as more charismatic. So you have to be able to switch domains. You have to be able to see, okay, well, what domain can I look at where somebody has this skill? And is that easy? No. That's part of why multiple intelligences and creativity are so important. And creativity is one of the major things that I talk about in my creativity course, because when you have multiple when you're developing all 9 of your multiple intelligences, you're going to be able to see things from multiple perspectives. You're going to be able to see, okay, well, maybe the skills in this domain can be transferred over to that domain. And this is how a lot of creative geniuses think. This is how a lot of inventions or good ideas come to fruition, through going cross-pollinating in different domains. And part of this is also ontology, which is the organization of information. The Dewey Decimal System is an example of this. When you go into a Library of Congress is another system like this. Wikipedia, how the way supermarkets or Amazon are organized is based off an ontology, which means how you're organizing stuff. This is why I said previously organization is so important, because if you have slots in your learning system or in your life for where do leadership skills go, where do acting skills go, where does no matter what sort of skill you're talking about, where does that belong in the grand scheme of things? If you have an ontology that's strong enough to handle that, then you're going to be able to make these leaps that other people can't make and may seem very difficult. So yes, it is difficult to do this. This is what we call an encyclopedic knowledge or understanding. And it actually isn't even that in depth. But for example, an Elon Musk. This is somebody who at a very young age, somewhere between 5 and 10, read the entire encyclopedia, which we're talking about is 1,000 to a few thousand pages, which is basically 10 large books. So this isn't something that's impossible to read or learn. It's just something that you may not be comfortable reading stuff in this range. And that's just something where you need to break it down. You need to develop your reading skills, and you just need to push your comfort zone, and be able to make more long-term investments, think long-term. But what this does is it gives you shallow knowledge of everything and allows you to connect things from disparate parts of the universe that other people can't make those connections. Okay, so a lot of these role models that you have, they're going to have a skill, and often it will be the skill that makes the difference. And it's going to be a skill that's hard to learn. This is where modeling skills come in. Check out that course. This is where creativity, multiple intelligences, having a wide range of knowledge comes into play, to be able to model those things. But role models are another list that you should make. And all of this is going to, right now, just to bring you back to reality for a second, we're just focusing on you. But the other half of the equation is what the world demands, where the world is going. And will argue later that the world is actually more important than where you are. Because not necessarily in an objective sense, but in the sense that we tend to overinflate how important the aspects of ourselves are in comparison to these aspects of the world, especially in a more, and when I say the world, that's at every level from group, family, community. We tend to overvalue the individual, undervalue the group in individualistic Western societies. Eastern societies, you can argue, tend to overvalue the group over the individual. And the question is, where is that happy medium? But what I will be arguing in this course is that we tend to overemphasize this, underemphasize this, and in large part, what really makes us happy is not necessarily the content of what we're doing, but the experience that surrounds it. And that really has to do with the world. It has to do with the community. It has to do with some of those meta skills as well. But all of those things transcend specific isolated skills or subject matter. So we'll be getting more into that later, but it's an important thing to pay attention to with role models is how they've matched up these two things, what opportunities they looked for, and get a clear sense of what was their goal and what if they made possible for them, and also what is their path. And the reason I say the goal is because sometimes what you think their goal is not necessarily what they thought their goal was. And so every path and every successful person really shouldn't be measured by what they achieve based on what your goals are, but what they achieve based on their goals. And some people have success in other people's eyes, but they don't have success in their own eyes. And so that's another important thing to pay attention to when you're looking at your role models. But role models are one of the most valuable things because they give you an all-inclusive picture that you don't really get when you're making isolated skills of the things you like and don't like, or the skills and abilities you have or don't have, personality traits, etc.